Hi, this is Ronald. Today I have a serious problem to solve, which is, should I switch from my Canon EOS R to the new Sony A7S III? I mean, the Sony has great specs, 10-bit 422 color, 4K without crop, everything looks great, but I want to know, do you really spot a difference when you shoot something with the EOS R compared to when you shoot it with the Sony? And this is what we find out today. I bought the Sony A7S III. By the way, I'm filming everything with the Canon EOS R right now. So I took both cameras, put it in my backpack and went into the forest, and I tried to find out, do we really have a noticeable advantage with the Sony A7S III? I mean, the Sony is more than twice as expensive as the EOS R, so there must be an advantage if I should switch to it. So the first test shot already made clear that the Sony is much sharper than the EOS R. I mean, look at the edges of these roof tiles here. I first thought I missed the focus on the EOS R, but that's not the case. My second test was about dynamic range. You need a high dynamic range when you have both dark and bright spots in your shot, and you want everything to be visible clearly without blowing out the highlights or crushing the blacks. This is my first shot where the brightness difference was not so big and both cameras did quite well. I exposed for the sky so that the highlights were not clipping. It was a cloudy day and I tried to color grade both shots quite equally. So there is no huge difference between the cameras in this situation. But then I went into the forest and of course there is less light. So the difference between the dark and the bright parts of the image is bigger and you need a higher dynamic range to capture everything equally. On both cameras I exposed for the sky again and, well, I mean, look at how much information we have here in the darker leaves on the Sony and how dark and compressed they are on the EOS R. There is no chance that you can recover some details or color out of this compressed mesh without getting a lot of noise. At home I filmed another example and I exposed for the highlights again. On the Sony everything looks fine and we even get a beautifully exposed cup. On the Canon, even on the lowest ISO setting, the window was clipping all the time. So I would have to change my f-stop to f4 or f8 or something, which I didn't want to do, because then my cup would get that much darker and I wanted a similar exposure of the cup in all the two shots. So when we compare these shots and expose the cup equally, we see that we have no problem with highlights on the Sony, but the highlights on the EOS R are already clipping. Then I thought about skin tones. Canon is well known for its good color science, its natural skin tones, so I wanted to see how the Sony compares to it. I shot two shots with both cameras and this is what it looks like. So is this the Sony? Or is this the Sony? Well, here's the solution. I think the Canon has more blue tones in the darks and it looks more compressed again. It's getting darker and darker in the forest and I am on f4 now, with ISO 12800. I don't know what this looks like on the computer, but on the display it looks quite good. Now we have a look how this looks like on the EOS R. On the Sony we have much more possibilities than on the EOS R, and of course this is because of the 10-bit 422 color. There is much more color information than on the 8-bit EOS R. Okay, then I tested something the Sony is famous for, low light scenarios. I went into our garden and filmed our house with both cameras. Here is the result. The Sony looks quite clean and the Canon doesn't. YouTube smoothens everything a lot, so I zoomed in to 200% and we should really see a difference now. Well, to be fair, there is a reason I use 12800 ISO. It's the second base ISO of the Sony A7S III. That means the whole image is very clear at this ISO value. Whereas the Canon, it's the maximum ISO value it offers. So it's very grainy, very noisy. If you bring down the Sony to 10,000 and the EOS R to 10,000, they both look grainy, but it's good to even have the possibility on the Sony to crank it up to 12,800 to have a clear image. And the Sony goes up to 409,000, I believe, so these are ridiculous values. Just for curiosity, I made a test shot with the Sony with 128,000 ISO. It was dark. On the Canon with a maximum ISO of 12,800, you could see this, which is nothing. The only way to see anything was to bring up a light. I used an Aperture MC at 10%, so not very much. And here we can compare the Sony and the Canon at 12,800 ISO. And again, the Canon brings up a lot more noise. It's not a bad camera, it's just not nearly as good as the Sony, which is just excellent. And this makes it very easy to film stuff like this with the Sony. I know this doesn't look extraordinary at all, but I always struggled with the EOS R when I filmed stuff in the forest and I had to raise my blacks or dark mids in post-production because I always ended up with grainy footage. And this is how easy it is to grade the footage. Convert S-Log to Rec 709, add some autumn colors, bring up the blacks of the jacket a tiny bit, lift the face, add some nice flares, and we are ready to go. So as a conclusion, the Sony won every single test I made with it, and the problem with the green or magenta shift of the Sony is not there anymore. I think the color science of the Sony is just as good as Canon's. And if you don't believe me, this video here, where you see me talking, was entirely shot on the A7S III and not, as I mentioned on the start, with the EOS R. So if you did not notice any ugly color shifts in here, then it's proven that the Sony is just as good as the Canon. Don't get me wrong, I love Canon cameras, I love my EOS R. I've shot music videos, corporate videos, private stuff, my YouTube videos, up to now all with the Canon EOS R, and I like it very much. But the Sony offers so much more possibilities with its 10-bit color, its 4K without crop. It really makes your life as a filmmaker much easier in post-production. So if you have the money, in Europe it costs 4,200 euro only the body, and the EOS R costs 1,900 only the body. So it's more than twice as expensive. If you have the money, you can't make anything wrong with the A7S III. It's a great camera and I'm so pumped to film my next project with it. So if you like this video, maybe give me a like below. Maybe subscribe to my channel and hopefully see you again in the next one.